Okay, you should see the little note says we accept recording. Okay.
I got
So
it.
so the first three papers, it is interesting. So you start with the big theme, Sabbath,
Right.
then start looking at it in a given context, which could be the digital age. I mean, is best way to say it. And then this last one was more, okay, well, where are clergy in this? And so you started large and come in. Actually, most research, particularly research projects, and I don't know who's doing your classes, the four research classes, but usually in a social science model, usually you start with, well, what's the problem and why is it a problem, and then and and what might be a solution, what's a good way to go forward as a result of sort of scanning everything that's going on, and here is what you would propose as the resolution to that, the integrative response. In traditional social science work, like for an EDD or even some other DMin programs, then what you do is actually construct an intervention, do it, and report the results of it. The NTS does not require that. They don't require, they want to see an intervention, but they don't require you to actually apply it and show use of results to see, well, does this work or not? Partially because, and one way to think about it with what you're working on, well, what most pastors are working on, because there's an issue in their church, partially because it's hard to control for all the variables. So my classic example is I knew a guy who really created a great artifact, but then he tried to preach on social ministry across the summer. And I just asked him during his defense, so how many of those parishioners were there for all four sessions of your preaching? And he had to be honest, summer, not so much. And so it's kind of like, well, how do you know your results really matter? Your circumstance, if you were to apply an intervention with your pastors on the Georgia district, that's where use of human subjects, what happens when the boss says you need to do this. You might show great results, but it'd be confounded just because, how many of your pastors, I grew up in the Southeast, so I know those pastors say this ain't working for me, period. But that would be the case. So I do think you've got one or two things, either an elaborate argument to make, why you would think that your solution would make a difference in restoring Sabbath, or an artifact, which could be a curriculum that you would suggest, or a retreat model. There's another way to think about it that you would suggest that for pastors on your district, but perhaps even pastors on other districts might, a DS might use and transport it somewhere else. What has to be at least unique enough, I think, because there are a lot of retreat models for people to go on Sabbath, and there are retreat models for clergy to go on Sabbath, is what is the unique role of this being done with a district focus, that kind of, why does this work in a particular way with these particular people, would be one way to at least have enough of a niche inside this that says, yeah, this would work in my district because ... from there. And kind of the way the writing of the dissertation goes, which I'm always nervous. There are actually other people who are guiding you in that writing, not me. And so I'm really nervous. But basically, the writing is, here's the problem, here are some of the reasons why, the review of literature, which is not just this person said this person said this, but it's a synthetic use. So you might think about it as, here are three major themes that apply, and one of them can be the digital age, and then the theological integration chapters, where you really craft your, well, here's my response to this. This is what needs to happen. So you've got a lot of good groundwork already from that standpoint. I have not read, it's really kind of interesting because you started with what is Sabbath, basically, and then you finally get to the question of clergy well-being and Sabbath, which a lot of times people would go the other way around. They'd start with the problem and then respond. But I haven't read that clergy well-being, but I think you can find resources out there. I know Barna's done work just north of you. Duke has an entire center on clergy well-being, and I'll send you a link to them. And Yale has done work on clergy burnout. And so, but I'm thinking particularly Duke, and then the work Chris Adams has done out on the West Coast. There's probably enough there that you could find parallel examples of clergy who struggle. The bigger question may be, why do they struggle with Sabbath? I know the digital age is one, but I think the nuance to think about what your artifact's going to do is really getting at what is the kind of, might be several things that cause them to struggle with Sabbath, but is there one particular thing that you want to kind of lift up inside that struggle that you think either a curriculum or a retreat would definitely solve? So this is called qualifications. So if I were to say, do you think the retreat would solve every problem that keeps pastors from maintaining Sabbath? You might go, no, there are other, it's just too complex. We can't turn off all of the digital age. We're stuck with it. But here is one sort of particular thing that I think as a district, we are uniquely positioned to help our pastors to recover a sense of Sabbath. Short of, tell them that they don't have to file any more reports. I don't think you're going to go that far. I know better. Okay. So, and this is one where you don't survey your old pastors, because I can pretty well tell you what they'll say. Well, as long as we don't have to file any APRs anymore, we don't have to turn in a yearly budget. I'll have plenty of time to rest. That's not the idea here. So, I hope this is helping. So one of the things is getting, and partially because of where you started, I would say this semester you have two things. One might be how can your paper this time kind of find that you may already have a hunch. I mean, it may already be in your head, but proving that this is the one thing that you think you can respond to. And then the question is, what's the best intervention? Do you want to write an elaborate, and this would be the back end of the dissertation, an elaborate sort of narrative that says, here's the way you could get at that? Or do you want to go ahead and construct something like a retreat? And then your second person on your committee, your second reader, would be someone who knows something about retreats, and they could look at it and go, yeah, I've read your argument as a leader, as a transformational leader, and I think, this could be an appropriate retreat model to make that work. And all you're doing, that's that standard for publications language that you'll see in your guidelines. The standard for publication is a weird phrase, but basically it means that whatever you do for the dissertation, it could be handed to another DS and run by that DS without you having to have any coaching or anything else. So you could hand it to a Brett Rickey, and he could just take it, read it, and it's got everything he needs so that he could actually conduct it. And that's what publishing is about. It's literally making something accessible and readable so that people can engage it without ever having to find the author, and make it go. And so standards for publication can sound very elaborate, but it really is finding somebody who's written retreat guidelines or written a curriculum and go, yeah, you've got everything in the curriculum that you need, that it can be handed off to another DS, maybe a DS even in the Methodist Church, or a bishop, and they could see inside that document, that artifact, enough information to make it go. So I hope that helps you here.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's really more, if you want to do it, so the classic line is, well, Sabbath and retreats seem to work. Well, do they? And what kind of retreat solves the most pressing problem in the need of pastors when it comes to maintaining Sabbath? That becomes what makes your dissertation unique. It's all said and done. Now, the review of literature may name 3 or 4 issues, and there might be 3 or 4 demands out of the history of Sabbath. Again, I haven't read your work, but it's really finding the sweet spot in those that you go, I think whatever I create, be it a curriculum or a retreat, or even if you write, just an extended argument on the back end of why this makes a difference, that becomes more PhD like, because then you're arguing a concept that's really crucial. But we allow it for a written narrative on the back end, so you think you can make a force of argument without showing an example. You could try to go that way. I'm a big believer in the artifact, mainly because that's what the DMins were really designed to do, was to create something that could help people.
Yeah.
And I think if you were to think about this in a way that, this could be something at DSLP you could share in a workshop later, and it could be transported. It could make a difference with a number of districts, without them having, and there might be key diagnostic questions you would want to ask that DS to think about on their district before they would implement it. And that could be at the beginning of the artifact. I mean, so do how well do you know your pastor struggle? And but then I would encourage you to think more about, um, really now winnowing down inside this conversation between clergy well-being and Sabbath, what seems to be 1 or 2 more important pieces, and then then how would you best respond? Now, if you want to
Yeah.
use this paper to help you, though, then you might already, I mean, you may be further down that road. I mean, you've been working on this, so you may have that hunch underneath everything that if you put all your stuff away and sat down, you could kind of get at it pretty quickly. Then I would, if you're just reading and researching right now, I think, if you're going to do something like a retreat, or even if you're going to do something like a curriculum, I dedicate some of your reading to, so what does a curriculum look like? Or some of your reading to, what are good retreat models that are out there? And there are people that can help you if you're just kind of working your way along right now. And there are even DMins that have already been done that might help you. So, Dana Prush focused on retreats. I think her retreats are really designed to work with young adults and older congregants. But she also has conducted retreats for young clergy that were, hear this language. They were retreats to encourage mentoring. So, yours is trying to do something else, but she knows what retreat models look like, and she'd be a good in-house NTS kind of person to tap into. But she might know others, even looking at her dissertation bibliography, which is available, just to see, what are have there been basic books on how to do a retreat that you could just, scan and read. And your argument in the paper this time around, for, I assume it's David Sharp's, would basically be making the argument, this is why a retreat model and these components within a retreat model, this is the why question, would address the problem. And then so how does yours look? That'll be what's left in the writing of the dissertation after the 4th class, of actually putting your piece together. But you could at least say, I think I know why a retreat will work, and this is why. Here are the 3 or 4 elements. Here are 3 or 4 cautions that, in conducting a retreat, particularly. I mean, I think one of the more interesting questions for you is, can a DS actually conduct a retreat? Does the DS be more of a coach, an encourager, and bring someone else in to do the retreat? what's the, and take time to talk about that in the paper so that you can add that in, maybe even the introduction of the dissertation, because there will always be this underlying question when you have when you, even if you're more of a shepherd and not, I mean, I know district superintendents vary partially because of context, but if you see yourself more as a pastor shepherd kind of person, or if you see yourself more as a strategist and an administrative kind of person, kind of talking about the role of the DS or the leader in relationship to providing spiritual guidance through any kind of spiritual formation process, I think is worth at least a little bit of time. And if that, I would assume that might be something, if you still are in coursework, you might be able to do as part of your coursework, but might not. But that would be how your coursework and your research paper could talk to each other. And all you're doing is building those nuances that when you write the dissertation, it's always somebody, just think of them as kind of like the gnarly youth pastor somewhere on the district who likes to ask those awkward questions all the time. And they're going, so how in the world can a DS ever expect to, hey, we work for you. So how in the world can we ever expect you to kind of guide us spiritually? And you've thought about how, other than saying, well, just shut up. I mean, you've thought about a more humane and reasonable answer. But that didn't take a chapter in the dissertation. That's just even part of your introduction. It's a half, it's a full page, but you've done the thinking to go, okay, I'm aware, that even though there is this need, this is the particular role that the district can play and the district superintendent can play in the midst of that. It's something to think about.
That's all extremely helpful, Dean. My hunch, as you mentioned, is that it's going to be this artifact that is a retreat model of some sort, that is pastors in community, because we have to learn the habit together. And you've also asked the good question: would it be the DS or another coach, another facilitator? I guess without having done a project like this, as I started with this burden for Sabbath, I thought, well, I need to describe it for folks. I need to narrow it in. The age, the clergy well-being piece. Your thoughts on why it's important as a district, or the niche. I think the fourth paper, I was really struggling with what does the fourth paper look like to get to the artifact. And I think your comments about how a retreat model addresses this is helpful. So in other words, I've done a lot of lit review, and I was in essence summarizing literature and synthesizing it and making it very readable, because I always have in mind communicating with people so they understand it. I guess even in my DMin, I'm really thinking about a reader going, oh, thank you for helping me understand that. So I was just really wrestling with how do I do that with this fourth piece to get to that curriculum. And your thoughts on, well, maybe Kyle, you could look at models of retreats that do address some of these issues is helpful. I've been struggling with that fourth piece.
Yeah, and I think by looking, I mean, see, this is a coffee conversation between the retreat development and the particular needs of the Georgia district. I mean, eventually, anyone can make the case that Sabbath is important for pastors.
Yes.
But
yes.
You're working on a leadership strategy that works within a given context. That's what a DMin really should do. It's not written for everything and everybody. It's really written so that you can flourish as a adaptive leader, or however your degree track is doing in your setting, your context. So even as you think about how retreat models work in general, and you're thinking about reviewing that, you're also thinking about, okay, how does this expose to me that one thing that I think could really help my pastors recover Sabbath in this context? And that way you've got that always in the back of the brain. That might be the last section of the paper, but it is sort of the fine tuning of not only why a retreat model can work, but why it works here. Now, when you're writing the dissertation, that's not the end of the dissertation. In some, well, I want to be careful. You'll put some of that more deep need of the clergy early in the dissertation. That's the problem that you're going to lift up. And then by the end, you'll work through the review of literature again. And by the end, you'll suggest a solution. But in some ways, right now, you're kind of working on how do I best articulate and introduce this project? And then, is this really the right response? This artifact is the right response. And if you can work on that over the semester, you've got the bookends, and then you're just kind of building out the middle, adding the jelly in the donut, so to speak. That makes me hungry all of a sudden. Never mind. I hope this is making sense to you, and then you can feel more comfortable. At least you've got, even as you write the dissertation, it may get muddy on occasion. I mean, those 4 papers are not the dissertation, so I really would encourage you at that point. You're really kind of going back and making sure everything follows flow. But if you have this paper where you go, okay, I have a little more tighter understanding of the content of how to articulate my context, and I have a very specific problem that emerges, and now I have a very specific kind of way of begin to think about the retreat. You're thinking about it, you haven't created it yet. That'll save you a ton of time at the next phase. You still need to put one together, but then that might be what you do after the 4 papers, and you do it, in consultation even. But that's a different, at least for now, you can come out and go, okay, now I know this is where I'm going to go because it fits this specific problem. I think you've had a good semester if you do that, and you'll be reading at the same time and building out what that looks like. Okay.
Yeah, super helpful. In addition to Dana's work and other retreat kind of models, do you have other suggestions of maybe literature that I should be looking at as I build out a bibliography for this 4th?
Yeah, and I'm a big believer, again, as you said, we learn in community. So one thing I'm going to mention is, I don't know if you know Scott Whalen. Scott's actually one of my students, and he's been looking at spiritual formation and more around clergy accountability, I think through small group engagement, but he had a retreat in mind. And so Scott might have done, if memory serves me, I think Scott might have previewed some of the retreat literature as well. And he's a student at NT. I mean, you can contact him through me, so I'll introduce you. And he may go, well, Dr. Blevins has a really bad memory, but he's at least someone who has a similar concern of providing spiritual formation at the district level. So it's one of those, hey, who do you know? I would really encourage more than anything else that you look up through the DMin projects that have been done in the SFAD. I mean, spiritual formation discipleship tracks usually spent a lot more time on this, and see who has used the retreat model. I remember when Dana was doing her work that she had someone who was a really good coach, but she had to go out there and find literature on how to create retreats. And there are a lot of retreats, but there's not as much preset literature. And I really wanted her to at least go through what's there to kind of compare to what she was doing. So her dissertation, the bibliography will be there. When it comes to organizations, I'm going to be the first person to say a 20-minute Zoom call with Doug Hardy probably would solve that in a hurry. Because I am certain there are particular groups who specialize in retreats. Probably the best way to say it. In other words, it could be a religious order that does this. There are Catholic retreat centers. So I'm sure that there are certain types of shared resources. Finding retreats and clergy might be a different question. And that might be a deep dive in the literature review. So how many articles have been done on clergy well-being and retreats? and what kind of models. When it comes to, and I will send this as a link. I'm going to share a screen real quick. Let me throw this up. So bear with me. This will just take a moment.
I have time. I appreciate your time.
Well, this is my pleasure, Kyle. So, Duke has a whole clergy and religion research collaborative, clergy health, and it's not hard. You can Google it, but it's basically clergy and religion research or clergy health initiative. It's probably the best one to look up. Clergy health initiative, and then Yale Divinity School did a lot on clergy well-being with Ray Jean Prescott Bell. She's pretty much I have a different student working on clergy health. There's several students working on clergy health, but with a totally different issue. And her work is constantly referenced in a lot of that. And most of it's because she worked with the Clergy Health Initiative at Duke University. And the guy at Duke, who's the sociologist that kind of runs everything, is David Eagle, is his name. And you'll be able to see this later when I send you a link to the video. But David, it's probably too late in where you are in your project. And again, I just wasn't aware of what everybody was doing. David was looking for places to do research that he was set up to do. He is kind of constrained. The Duke endowment is pretty much focused on North Carolina, but he was really looking to do more than that. And the fact that, Georgia's as I mean, you guys don't fight that much over football, mainly because there's nobody in North Carolina to compete with Georgia teams. But there might be yet research that they've done that you could actually, quite frankly, contact them and say what's been done and ask what's been done. And I think I didn't read your articles, but I do think you already know about Chris Adams and what Chris has accomplished. So that shouldn't be that big a deal. I'm just going to stop.
Yeah. Yeah, I quote Chris and Matt Bloom pretty frequently in the last clergy well-being one, but I didn't know about David. I did know about some of Duke's studies.
Okay.
And
all right. Well, then you're probably further along, and I just didn't have time to read the papers. But
no, that's fine.
would be when it comes to without me just sending you Dana's dissertation, I would just say download it from WHWC. I'm pretty sure hers is available through our DMin repository, and if not, I'll put you in contact. But Dana's probably the best person when it comes to clergy well-being and clergy and retreats. She's done a number of those when they had a different initiatives. So she might know of even, people that are specialized in that area that you could reach out to.
Okay.
And I think that would get you enough. I mean, there are a couple of general books on how to do retreats, but they might be able to. I'm not opposed. I don't know how Dave Sharp's approaches research, but even if you did a couple of focused interviews with them and recorded them and included key insights out of those, that might not hurt for this last paper. For the dissertation, then at least you'd have ideas, keywords, concepts that you go out and find literature to support it that way.
Okay, that's super. Yeah, David's been really great, but it was his first kind of run at this too in terms of guiding it. So he was excited about the topic, felt good about it, but just I think kind of let me approach it as I felt like I needed to, and encourage me along the way. But yeah, this now I'm thinking about the timeline, and you may not be able to answer all these questions, but here I am, mid-November. I've got a fourth research paper to write, and then next year I need to write really the dissertation or the artifact. 2025 is what I would target. So as a graduation, so just timeline wise, I mean, that fourth paper really needs to, early part of the year,
Yeah.
needs to be knocked out because pretty soon just the design and form class for the, for the dissertation and the writing of that will happen all through 2024.
Yeah. And I would say you're writing a paper that almost sets your front end and your back end of your dissertation. So, so if you think about it, though, I'm always nervous. There's somebody else that's going to tell you more than what I'm doing. So, but I'm just going to give you my take on it, and then plausible deniability down the road. So you go. But Dean Blevins said, I may delete the video at that moment. Okay.
I won't throw you under the bus. You're helping me.
That normally there's an introduction, a chapter one, kind of, and this is just social science research. So what is the problem? I mean, in general, and then during the review of literature, the way they've set it up, they just say review of literature. Well, no, it's, if this is the problem, these are the key components of the problem. And so you take the literature you've read and you reorganize it around the key themes, which includes, there'll be a section on the mandate of why Sabbath's important, period. Yes, you need that. And what are some of the both proximate but larger challenges? You've already done some of that in the whole social media or digital age component. So yeah, really what you're going to do is there's a third chapter called theological integration. And I have mixed emotions about how they use that language, but it's based on it's a kind of DMin project model that's a little bit different that Levi's aware of than what I've been used to. And that theological integration is really going, it's not merely going, well, I've already talked about why Sabbath's important. I've done biblical and theological work in a review of literature. It's really going, this is where I'm going to make the case that Sabbath will really address this issue conceptually. And this, and that retreats can make a difference in restoring Sabbath against this. So it's the place where you make the argument, make the case for that the retreat will deliver. And that integration you're kind of playing with this semester is when you bring all those components that you've been reading and writing about, and you pull out the key elements and say, in light of this specific context, with the mandate of Sabbath still standing before us, retreats can really help us in this very particular way. Mm-hmm. And then
Thanks.
To make the case is the next chapter, which is the artifact. And so, and in some ways you're going, here's the artifact, you believe me or not. And if somebody can read through the artifact and go, I think I can apply this, and I see in the artifact how it will, the how of the why, then you write a conclusion, implications of when the artifact might use, concessions, what might not work well, those kinds of things. And that's the dissertation in a nutshell, and you're done.
Yeah.
But if you can feel that you could walk out afterwards, and a good way to think about this, it's done in writing, but you can make a substantive argument that in the face of this, that you really do know what the problem is and the uniqueness of it. You really believe Sabbath is important enough to be renewed, and actually you even think Sabbath might be part of the answer to that problem. Mm-hmm. Then the retreat can, and this is the major argument though, but the retreat is the best way to get that to go forward. If you can make that, you have the arc of the dissertation. It's just the gnarly piece of writing it in such a way that the connect the dots work all the way across the board.
That's helpful.
And the review of literature, I do have a link to a video I did for reviews of literature in regular class writings, like when you write a review of literature paper for a semester. And you could use that to think about the review of literature chapter. I'm just a big believer. A lot of people have done reviews of literature and they review major thinkers. So it comes almost like a serial review of thinkers. To me, it's always a review of major themes. How did those thinkers fit a given theme? And you're writing a map of how to get through the material during the review of literature. And it's a map particular to getting to the retreat. So I hope you hear him. So it's, there's 2 or 3 different ways to get from Atlanta to Nashville. You're just mapping the right way to get from Atlanta to Nashville, which, as far as I'm concerned, there is no right way to get from Atlanta. The right way is
Good
to
luck.
avoid Atlanta.
Good luck with that.
Possible, but that's what the review of literature is trying to do in the dissertation. It's summarizing the big rocks that you need. Mm-hmm. So you've done that work. When you get to the integration, you're not having to redo all that again. You can really focus on the altar call, getting people down to the back end of the paper. Okay.
Super helpful, Dean.
Well,
thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up with Dana and look for her bibliography too. Dana and I were at NTS together same time.
Okay.
And yeah. And Dana's a friend.
Well,
so
this is good. I keep referring her a lot of places. I'm not sure I'm going to be her friend before it's over. but
that's funny.
I just think, she does have that expertise. She plays low key on a lot of things, I know. And when they were doing them, it was her and Jess. It's through our Center for Pastoral Leadership. So Jess was involved, and I think Doug was involved in those retreats. But between Dana and Doug, that's 2 Ds. You don't need a third. And they're the people. They're the gurus. I'm just an ex-youth pastor at that point. So
yeah,
let them help you figure out where the literature base is.
One last question, and it's in my paperwork somewhere, but when you write the dissertation with an artifact, the volume of that, in my head, it was like 2/3 of this is narrative, and maybe the last third is the artifact. But I don't know if that's really.
I think
I'm thinking
it's somewhere between 33 to 45%. So it depends on the artifact. So if you're going to write a curriculum, if you're going to write a good curriculum, for instance, it's going to take. We're so used to constructing something we ourselves teach.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't fill in the gaps at all. But when you're writing for the Foundry, and or writing for Rejoin, Rethink, and Orange down, and it's a lot. Curriculum writing is a lot more precise and painful, and you have to identify a method and all that. Well, it's the same thing with the retreat. We can go in with 5 handouts and conduct a retreat. It's another thing to create a booklet that really guides that retreat. So that's where Dana did that. So that's where Dana's dissertation is a good example of what that kind of an artifact would look like. What you got to be doing is thinking, well, she's working with young adults and congregants. I'm going to be working with pastors. How do they arrive? What is important for them? And how do I, even thinking about it, is how do I distinguish between this and a pastors and spouse getaway, that they know this is something else. So you might want to think about what you do to prepare them for the retreat. Very much. Mm-hmm. What would you do for follow-up? Not that you'll do, again, not testing measures, but what would be good ways to know whether or not the retreat actually accomplished its goal, even if it's just narratives at an assembly meal. Those kind of simple pieces, but all of a sudden you got to get all that onto a piece of paper, and it's formatted differently, but it will occupy more space than you realize. So
yeah, okay. Thank you, Dean.
You're welcome.
For you. Look, when are you still traveling or for sabbatical?
I literally, I'll tell you what, just so you don't have to deal with this, I'll